Thank you for joining us today for another presentation of Let the Bible Speak with your speaker, Brett Hickey.
Welcome to Let the Bible Speak. We're committed to exploring the fundamentals of Scripture, so crucial to building faith and producing obedience. But we're also intent on addressing controversial topics that other religious programs avoid. We strive to reflect the commitment the Apostle Paul expressed to the Ephesian elders in Acts 20, verse 27. For I have not shunned to declare to you the whole counsel of God. This morning, do you really care about what Jesus endured to pay your sin debt and redeem your soul? If so, you will appreciate our study. We pick up where we left off previously with Pilate vacillating. He knew Jesus was not guilty of the charges leveled by the chief priests, and had declared it publicly before the growing mob. But he wrestled with what exactly to do. Luke provides information not recorded by the other gospel writers. A fortuitous release from Pilate's political jam seems to present itself. After declaring their error to the chief priests and crowd, I find no fault in him. We read in Luke chapter 23, beginning with verse 5, the following words. But they were the more fierce, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Initially, Herod was thrilled to see Jesus. Herod viewed Jesus more as a magician, though, than the Messiah. He longed to see Jesus, certain that Jesus would put on a show for him. But not only did Jesus perform no miracles for Herod, he refused to dignify Herod's barrage of questions, even with a response. Meanwhile, the rabid rabbis continued their sideshow, vehemently assaulting Jesus with unfounded accusations in hopes that Herod would condemn Jesus to death. Herod did not buy their lies, but after exhausting himself and ridiculing Jesus with his soldiers, rather than releasing Jesus as justice demanded, Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate. This likely indicates that the Pharisees lied when they warned Jesus in Luke 13 that Herod the fox, as Jesus called him, was seeking to kill him. Here, Jesus had been hand-delivered with the authorities, all but begging for his death, and yet Herod, like Pilate, passes the buck. Perhaps Herod was still haunted by his unwilling participation in the beheading of Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist. Herod was concerned that John the Baptist had come back from the dead as Jesus, Mark 6, verse 16. Herod's final feeble attempt at humor involved sending Jesus back to Pilate in a gorgeous robe. Barnes says this word gorgeous indicated a bright white robe, like that worn by Jewish kings. Now back to Pilate for condemning the innocent after our song.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now
suffering Pilate is once again confronted with doing what is just and setting Jesus free, or violating what little conscience he had left and caving in to the Jews' demands. Pilate gathers himself and flexes his muscles before the Jews once more, asserting in more delicate terms, "You're wrong. Get over it and get out of here." He says in Luke 23, verse 13, "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. I've interrogated him, and so has Herod. Neither of us find him guilty. Your case is flawed." Another opportunity presents itself to Pilate to free himself from this Gordian knot and allow the Jews to save face from the evil they were about to perform. Pilate had to be thinking, if only I can take the Jews' focus off their frustration with Jesus and redirect them to a positive, the Roman concession in honor of the Jewish Passover of releasing a prisoner of their choice. We're now in the Gospel of Mark, Mark 15, beginning with verse 6. "Now at the feast he was accustomed to releasing one prisoner to them whomever they requested. There was one named Barabbas who was chained with his fellow rebels. They had committed murder in the rebellion. Then the multitude, crying aloud, began to ask him to do just as he had always done for them. But Pilate answered them, saying, 'Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?' Barabbas was the most offensive Jewish prisoner that Pilate could find. This notorious prisoner, Matthew 27, verse 16 and 17, was a murderer, a robber, and as A.T. Robertson says of Mark 15, verse 7, leader of an insurrection or revolution probably against Rome, and so guilty of the very crime they had tried to fasten on Jesus, who only claimed to be king in the spiritual sense of a spiritual kingdom. Barabbas was everything the Jews accused Jesus of being, and more. Only in Barabbas' case, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Barabbas had been chained with his fellow rebels who had committed murder in the rebellion. There's no indication of how many fellow rebels, but some scholars suggest these criminals may have included the two crucified with Jesus. If so, Barabbas may have been intended for the middle cross. There's a coincidence in the pairing of Jesus and Barabbas. The name Barabbas literally means son of the Father. In addition, there's evidence that Barabbas' first name was Jesus, a common name in that day. Pilate must have thought he had resolved his difficulty by giving them this choice, the vile versus the virtuous. Either Jesus Barabbas, son of the Father, or Jesus, the Son of God, which is called the Christ. Pilate was doing an end around the chief priests and appealing to the common sense of the crowd, Mark 15, verse 10, for he knew that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. The battle of wits between Pilate and the chief priests waged on. Meanwhile, we find an unusual interruption recorded only in Matthew 27, verse 19. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that just or righteous man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him." This verse is the only Bible mention of Pilate's wife, Procula. But perhaps because of her boldness on Jesus' behalf, some have held the unlikely belief that she later became a Christian. At any rate, the typical Roman superstition would make her warning a great concern to Pilate and provide further motivation to set Jesus free. Pilate lost the battle with the chief priests, who apparently anticipated Pilate's move and manipulated the crowd, Matthew 27, verse 20. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes, Mark says, stirred up the crowd, that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said to them, Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" They said, "Barabbas." Everyone knows the shame and embarrassment of not being picked, but never was an oversight less deserved. Here stands before them one who loves them more than anyone on earth, one who was willing to die for them, and they favor the most heinous criminal in Jerusalem over him. Matthew 27, verse 22, Pilate said to them, "What then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said to him, "Let him be crucified." Then the governor said, "Why, what evil has he done?" They cried out all the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." Luke 23, verse 22. Then he said to them the third time, "Why, what evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go." Pilate seeks another out, thinking somehow that the brutal whipping will assuage their anger. Let's get a feel for the atmosphere from Mark chapter 15, verse 16. There the Bible says, "Then the soldiers led him away into the hall called Praetorium, and they called together the whole garrison." Albert Barnes writes in his commentary that the band or cohort was a tenth part of a Roman legion and consisted of between 400 and 600 men. This introduces us to the public humiliation amidst the barbaric soldiers. This brings us to the bulk of the account of Pilate contending with the Jews after the scourging in John 19, verse 1. "So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him." According to BibleHistory.com, the Romans would scourge a condemned criminal. A Roman scourge was a short whip made of 2 or 3 leather ropes connected to a handle. Scourging would quickly remove the skin. The leather was knotted with bones or heavy indented pieces of bronze. Sometimes the Roman scourge contained a hook at the end called a scorpion. The criminal was made to stoop. He would bend over like such, and doing so, he would expose his back and shoulders, and it would allow deeper lashes in his flesh. According to Jewish law, the number of stripes was 40 less 1, Deuteronomy 25, verse 3. Nevertheless, scourging among the Romans was a more severe form of punishment, and there was no legal limit to the number of blows. Deep lacerations, torn flesh, exposed muscles, and excessive bleeding would leave the criminal half dead. Death was often the result of this cruel form of punishment, though it was necessary to keep the criminal alive, in this case, to be brought to the public subjugation on the cross. The centurion in charge would order the lictors to halt the flogging when the criminal was near death. This would be cruel and unusual punishment here today, but it was also part of God's plan. Isaiah 53, verse 5, "But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. And the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all." During the monarchies of the 15th and 16th centuries, the English court began having whipping boys. A whipping boy was generally of high status and educated with the prince from birth. Growing up together, the prince and whipping boy became close since the prince did not have many playmates. This bond made more effective the whipping boy as punishment for a prince. You see, because he was royalty, only the king could punish his son for misbehaving or neglecting his studies. Since the king was often absent when the prince needed to be punished, tutors could whip the prince's friend to punish the prince. It was horribly unfair to punish the whipping boy for the prince's error, but someone had to be punished for the wrongdoing. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Jesus is the best friend you will ever have. And even though he is the king, he's also the whipping boy. He took the brutal whipping for my sin and for yours. The question is, how much are you willing to endure for him? John 19, verse 2, and the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. This pierced the brow and scalp in a distinct pattern. More abuse, more pain, more blood, more ridicule, mimicking Herod's act of dressing Jesus like a king. This was Pilate's idea of justice. Jesus deserved none of it. Verse 3, then they said, "Hail, King of the Jews," and they struck him with their hands. How can you hit anyone unprovoked, much less the kindest man that ever lived? Mark chapter 15. Now we're on verse 19. The Bible says, then they struck him on the head with a reed and spat on him, and bowing the knee, they worshiped him. They must have had a big laugh over their mock coronation ceremony. But for those who never repented, those who never legitimately crowned him King of Kings in this life, the scriptures are clear, Romans 14:11. Every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess. Oh, we must bow while we can still get credit. Pilate was persistent. In John chapter 19, verse 4, we read, Pilate then went out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no fault in him." Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they should have turned their heads in horror at the bloody mess, satisfied with the torture unleashed on their innocent enemy. But no, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" These Jews were a vicious, bloodthirsty lot. I'm reminded of the self-righteous mob of John 8 that surrounded like vultures circling their prey, the woman caught in adultery. The tens of thousands of lambs sacrificed in Jerusalem that week did not spill enough blood to satisfy them. They had to have the blood of this two-legged lamb. The scribes and Pharisees in John 8 were convicted by their conscience when Jesus challenged them, "He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first." But on this day, the Jewish leaders felt no such compunction. Pilate said to them, "You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him." This brings us to John chapter 19. Beginning with verse 7. The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to our law, he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again into the praetorium and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have power to crucify you and power to release you?" Jesus answered, "You could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." They promoted allegiance to the Roman emperor, who was worshipped as a god, over the Messiah, who truly was the Son of God. John 19, verse 14. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." But they cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate saith unto them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Then he delivered him to them to be crucified. Then they took Jesus and led him away. Luke 23, verse 24. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested. And he released to them the one they requested, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison. But he delivered Jesus to their will. Our study this morning is really not so much about the verdict of the crowd, the chief priests or Pilate. It's more about your verdict. What is your verdict? Several statements and questions in this account are relevant to us. Pilate frames well the great question we must all ask in Matthew 27:22. What then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? There is no question where the chief priests and Jewish mob stood. But what about you? What will you do with Jesus? Will you crown him or crucify him? Which will it be? Which has it been? You know, the life you live from here on says either crown him or crucify him. Have you crowned Jesus King? Have you submitted to his authority? He certainly earned your wholehearted devotion. Hebrews 5, verse 8, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Matthew 27, verse 24, when Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, rather that a tumult was rising, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it. Oh no, Pilate did not cleanse himself from guilt, from responsibility. And friend, neither can you. Verse 25, Matthew 27. And all the people answered and said, his blood be on us and on our children. Oh, friends, they had no idea what they were saying. Mark 15:15. So Pilate, wanting to gratify the crowd, released Barabbas to them, and he delivered Jesus to be crucified. This is often the issue when we clamor by the life we live to crucify Christ instead of crown him. We want to gratify the world. We want to go along to get along. Is that what you're doing? Won't you turn to Jesus today? What will your verdict be? Stay with us for a final word after our song.
So many souls are wandering aimlessly, they cannot find their way. Looking for someone, looking for something, just to bear their pain. They cannot see that Jesus our Savior can lend them a helping hand. Jesus can free them.
Bible says in Matthew 27, verse 17, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ?" This morning, who will you choose? You must make the choice. Thank you for watching. Let the Bible speak. You can call or write for a free copy of 1349, Condemning the Innocent. We also offer our free monthly newsletter that you can get sent to you by email. Visit letthebiblespeak.com to watch videos, hear audio, or read transcripts of the program at your convenience. Finally, we echo the sentiment of the Apostle Paul when he wrote in Romans 16, verse 16, "The churches of Christ salute you." Until next week, goodbye, and may God bless you.